What specific cognitive process does your proposed method target in large language models, particularly in regards to implicit reasoning?
The proposed method targets the internal cognitive process of implicit multi-hop reasoning in large language models, LLMs, by examining how these models represent and utilize intermediate entities during reasoning tasks. Specifically, it investigates whether LLMs genuinely conduct step-by-step reasoning internally or merely recall answers from memorized knowledge. To achieve this, the method employs two diagnostic tools: cross-query semantic patching, which enhances causal interpretability by identifying intermediate entity representations based on their semantic transferability, and a cosine-based representational lens, which analyzes the structural consistency of internal representations across different reasoning contexts. The findings reveal that successful implicit reasoning is closely associated with the clustering of intermediate representations in cosine space, indicating that LLMs rely on geometric regularity rather than explicit decodability to facilitate generalization across queries. This comprehensive analysis provides insights into the mechanisms underlying implicit reasoning, highlighting the importance of representational alignment and the role of training data in shaping these cognitive processes.
How does the proposed method or algorithm work? Please illustrate the steps taken in your approach, particularly how you implement cross-query semantic patching and the cosine-based representational lens.
The proposed method involves a structured approach to analyze implicit reasoning in large language models, LLMs, through two key diagnostic tools: cross-query semantic patching and a cosine-based representational lens. Cross-query semantic patching works by first extracting the hidden representation believed to encode an intermediate entity from a specific layer and position in a source query. This representation is then inserted into a structurally similar target query at the same position. If the model's output matches the expected answer after this patching, it indicates that the hidden state encodes a semantically valid intermediate entity, demonstrating its causal relevance across queries. The cosine-based representational lens, on the other hand, focuses on examining the structural consistency of internal representations across different reasoning contexts. By collecting hidden states corresponding to the same intermediate entity from various queries, the method assesses whether these representations exhibit a consistent geometric pattern in the model's embedding space, using cosine similarity as a metric for semantic proximity. This approach allows for the identification of how the model organizes and reuses internal abstractions, rather than relying solely on explicit decodability. Together, these tools enable a comprehensive examination of the internal processes that drive implicit reasoning in LLMs.
Can you provide a detailed, illustrative example of how your method processes a query involving multi-hop implicit reasoning, and what the intermediate representations look like at each step?
In our method, we process a multi-hop implicit reasoning query structured as E_1, R_1, R_2, right arrow E_3. For instance, consider the query where E_1 is Alice, R_1 is a friend of, and R_2 is a sibling of, leading to the answer E_3 being Bob. Initially during phase 1, the model memorizes the atomic facts, such as Alice is a friend of Charlie and Charlie is a sibling of Bob, but does not generalize to the multi-hop query. As training progresses to phase 2, the model begins to form intermediate representations at the R_1 token position, where it encodes the intermediate entity, e.g. Charlie, in its hidden states. By phase 3, the model successfully clusters these intermediate representations, allowing it to generalize to unseen queries involving out-of-distribution OOD triples, such as when Charlie is not explicitly present in the training data, but is inferred through the learned structure. The intermediate representations at each step reflect a consistent geometric pattern, with ID-derived representations forming tight clusters in cosine similarity space, indicating the model's ability to reuse these representations effectively across different contexts.
What empirical benefits does your proposed method demonstrate over previous approaches in terms of model performance, and how do these advantages directly relate to the structure of training data used?
Our proposed method demonstrates significant empirical benefits over previous approaches by enabling a more nuanced understanding of implicit reasoning in large language models, LLMs, through the use of a structured symbolic environment. This environment allows for fine-grained control over training data, which is crucial for isolating specific training signals necessary for solving compositional queries. Notably, we observe that multi-hop implicit reasoning emerges in three distinct stages: memorization, in-distribution generalization, and cross-distribution generalization, highlighting the structured developmental process of reasoning capabilities. Additionally, our findings reveal that while exposure to in-distribution ID triples is not strictly necessary for achieving in-distribution generalization, it significantly accelerates the onset of this behavior by constraining the representational space early in training. This structured approach, combined with diagnostic tools like cross-query semantic patching and cosine-based representational analysis, allows us to connect internal representational mechanisms to observable behavioral patterns, thereby enhancing model performance in multi-hop reasoning tasks.
Describe the experimental setup used to validate your method. How did you ensure that the assessment of implicit reasoning was both controlled and comprehensive?
To validate our method for assessing implicit reasoning in large language models, LLMs, we constructed an extended symbolic environment that allowed for fine-grained control over training data and query configurations. This setup included atomic triples and compositional queries, specifically designed to isolate the effects of different training signals on reasoning performance. We implemented targeted omissions and query-level variations, enabling us to conduct controlled ablation studies that could distinguish between memorization, in-distribution generalization, and cross-distribution reasoning. Additionally, we employed two diagnostic tools: cross-query semantic patching for causal interpretability and a cosine-based representational lens to analyze the structural consistency of internal representations. This comprehensive approach ensured that we could precisely identify the emergence of implicit reasoning behaviors and their underlying mechanisms throughout the training process.
What limitations or potential biases exist in your approach, particularly regarding the assumptions made about the role of ID and OOD triples in the reasoning process?
Our approach has several limitations and potential biases, particularly concerning the assumptions about the roles of in-distribution ID and out-of-distribution OOD triples in the reasoning process. Firstly, while we found that ID triples accelerate generalization by constraining the representational space, we also observed that the model's ability to generalize to OOD triples in the first hop is largely an artifact of representational alignment induced by ID exposure rather than true generalization. This suggests a bias in interpreting the model's performance on OOD queries, as it may not reflect genuine reasoning capabilities, but rather a reliance on shared representations shaped by ID triples. Additionally, our findings indicate that second-hop generalization requires specific query-level training matches, which may not be adequately captured in our experimental design, potentially overlooking the complexity of how models learn to navigate multi-hop reasoning. Lastly, the reliance on a specific model architecture, GPT-2, may limit the generalizability of our conclusions to other architectures or larger models, which could exhibit different dynamics in reasoning and representation formation.